Usually when we think about aging, we just immediately look in the mirror.
Right.
We look for like the gray hairs, the crow's feet, the changes right there on the surface. We have this entire societal obsession with what we can see and more specifically with what we want to lose.
Oh, totally.
We want to lose the wrinkles. We want to lose the stubborn body fat. We basically want to lose the literal weight of the years. But what if we have the entire equation completely backward?
It is a profound misdirection. I mean, we are intensely focused on shrinking, on taking away, on minimizing ourselves as we get older.
Yeah.
When you look at it from a biological perspective, our survival actually depends entirely on what we need to gain and, more importantly, what we need to protect.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to fundamentally change how you think about aging, weight loss, and, longevity in general. We are pulling from an incredibly eye-opening source today.
Really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it's an in-depth interview with a leading osteopathic physician. She is a nutritional researcher who spent years studying under world-class scientists. She's an author. And she coined a term that is about to become a major part of your vocabulary.
Muscle-centric aging.
Exactly. Muscle-centric aging.
And that phrase, it just completely flips traditional medicine on its head. I mean, in a medical landscape that is obsessed with losing fat, she argues that we are ignoring the single most important and honestly the largest organ in our body.
And here is the shocking premise we're going to unpack today for now. It's a hook that literally stopped me in my tracks when I was going through these sources.
Yeah, it's big.
What if the diseases we so closely associate with aging, things like, Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, what if they aren't actually diseases of aging at all? What if they are fundamentally diseases of skeletal muscle?
Right, because when you look at the top causes of death, like the official lists from the CDC or the World Health Organization, they don't mention skeletal muscle anywhere.
Right, heart disease is at the top.
Heart disease is at the top. But if you trace the pathology back, decades before diagnosis, the root cause almost always points to the health, or really the lack of health, of our muscle tissue. It completely rewrites how we should be approaching preventative care.
So to understand how this revolutionary idea even originated, we kind of have to look at this physician's journey, because she didn't just wake up one day and decide to disrupt the fitness and health industry.
No.
She started with incredibly rigorous, dedicated training in nutritional sciences. We're talking 7 years studying under a world-class protein researcher at the University of Illinois.
Yeah.
And that was followed by medical fellowships in geriatric and obesity medicine. So she really saw the full spectrum of the human lifespan.
She was deeply embedded in academia. She was looking at how amino acids function at a cellular level, publishing papers, doing the really hard science. But there was this specific pivotal moment that drove her out of pure nutritional research and into medical school.
Oh, right, the tornado story.
Yeah, it's a story about a tornado warning in Illinois, of all things.
The fallout shelter epiphany. So she's at the University of Illinois, right? Surrounded by miles and miles of cornfields, and a massive tornado warning hits.
Right.
She's huddled in this fallout shelter in the basement of a university building with a bunch of people for what feels like hours. The sirens are going off, people are panicked, and she has this really stark realization.
Yeah.
She thinks if something terrible happens right now, if someone is injured or goes into cardiac arrest, I am totally useless.
Wow.
Yeah, she literally said the best I can do is tell someone to eat an apple or a piece of steak.
Which, it makes sense. She realized the limitation of her scope right then and there.
Mm-hmm.
Merely offering dietary advice, while it's obviously important for long-term health, it wasn't a robust enough medical intervention to truly save or change lives in critical, acute moments.
Yeah.
That feeling of vulnerability, of wanting to have a tangible, immediate impact on human life, that's what pushed her to apply to medical school.
And she specifically chose osteopathic medicine, which I think is an interesting detail to note.
Very important detail.
For anyone unfamiliar, osteopathic doctors, or DOs, they have the exact same privileges as MDs, right? They prescribe medicine, they do surgery, but their training has this added focus on the musculoskeletal system. They learn manual medicine, how the body moves, how the bones and muscles interact.
And that dual background is exactly what set the stage for her paradigm shift. You have a doctor with deep cellular-level nutritional science expertise, right?
Right.
Combined with a comprehensive understanding of the musculoskeletal system, who then goes on to do fellowships in geriatric and obesity medicine. She was just uniquely positioned to notice something that the rest of the medical community was largely, well, overlooking.
I want to talk about a specific patient she encountered during her fellowship because this story is what really grounded the research for me. Let's talk about Betty.
Ah, Betty. Betty is basically the archetype of the modern medical tragedy.
Yeah. She was a research participant the physician worked with, a mother of 3 in her mid-50s, and Betty did literally everything traditional medicine told her to do.
She followed all the rules.
All the rules. She followed the traditional food pyramid, lots of healthy whole grains, minimal fat. She restricted her calories. She did her daily cardiovascular exercise on the treadmill.
Right.
She spent her entire adult life wrestling with the same 20 to 30 pounds, yo-yo dieting, losing it, regaining it. She managed her weight exactly how the system prescribed.
And despite being the model patient for traditional health advice, when they imaged Betty's brain as part of a study, it looked like the beginning of an Alzheimer's brain.
Wait, in her 50s? But she was doing everything the doctors told her to do. How is that even biologically possible?
That was the exact question the physician asked herself. I mean, she felt mortified. She realized that the medical community was doing Betty, and honestly, millions of women like her,
Right.
a massive disservice. The physician stepped back and looked at the common denominator among all the patients she was seeing across the board, whether in the dementia clinic, the hospital, or the nursing home. The issue wasn't that they were over-fat. It was that they were profoundly under-muscled.
So treating aging by only focusing on fat is it's like trying to fix a failing car by taking out the heavy seats to make it lighter, completely ignoring that the engine itself is rusting away.
That is a great way to put it.
Right. You take out the seats, you strip the interior, and sure, you might get better gas mileage for a mile or two because the car is lighter. But the engine is still going to stall on the highway. We are so focused on lightening the load, losing fat, dropping pounds on the scale, that we are completely ignoring the engine that drives our metabolism.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the flaw in our current medical model. The hyper-focus on fat loss essentially just ignores the functional machinery of the body. Betty was carrying out a regimen, calorie restriction, combined with pure cardio that slowly deteriorated her engine over decades.
Which is terrifying.
It really is. Skeletal muscle dictates the trajectory of your life as you age.
I want you listening to just think about your own parents or your grandparents. When you look at their decline as they age, how much of that is actually just linked to a simple loss of physical strength?
Exactly.
The inability to stand up from a low chair without using their arms, the hesitation before walking down a flight of stairs because they don't really trust their legs to catch them. We brush that off as just, getting old.
Right, it's just normal aging.
Yeah, but that isn't some vague, inevitable aging process. That is a specific biological loss of tissue.
And if Betty's underlying issue was a lack of muscle, we really need to understand what muscle is actually doing in the body beyond just moving bones around. We tend to think of muscle purely in mechanical terms.
Like biceps and six-packs.
Right, it allows us to lift things, it helps us look good at the beach, it powers a golf swing. But this deep dive requires us to view muscle through an entirely different biological lens.
The phrase she uses in the sources is that muscle is the body's metabolic currency.
It is the ultimate currency. And unlike money, it's the only currency you cannot inherit, you cannot buy, you cannot negotiate for, and you certainly cannot inject it with Botox.
Right.
You have to earn it through physical effort. Physiologically, skeletal muscle is the primary site in your body for glucose disposal.
Okay, let's break that down. When I eat a bowl of pasta, what is my muscle actually doing?
Well, when you eat carbohydrates, your digestive system breaks them down into glucose, which then enters your bloodstream.
Okay.
High blood sugar is toxic to the body. It damages blood vessels and nerves, so your body releases insulin to shuttle that glucose out of the blood and into your cells. Skeletal muscle is the main sponge that soaks up that blood sugar.
Just sponge.
Yes, up to 80% of glucose disposal happens in skeletal muscle. It is also the primary site for fatty acid oxidation, meaning it's the main furnace where your body burns fat for energy at rest.
And the sources also mention that muscle is a secretory organ. It acts like an endocrine organ, right?
Yes, what's fascinating here is that muscle isn't just dumb tissue waiting for commands.
Yeah.
When you contract your muscles, they secrete proteins called myokines.
Myokines.
These myokines travel through the bloodstream and they communicate with your brain, your liver, your immune system, and your bones. They help regulate inflammation and promote brain health.
Yeah.
But there is a silent thief that starts stealing this metabolic currency much earlier than most people realize. It's a condition called sarcopenia.
age-related muscle wasting. And the data here, I mean, it just blew my mind. Sarcopenia doesn't start in your 70s or 80s when you're using a walker.
No, it doesn't.
It starts in your 30s.
Yeah.
If you are in your 30s and you are largely sedentary, working a desk job, you are already losing skeletal muscle.
The loss is gradual, but it's compounding. You might lose 3 to 8% of your muscle mass per decade after age 30, and that rate actually accelerates after age 60. And as you lose that muscle, you don't just get weaker, you fundamentally alter your metabolism. There is a visual from the source material that is incredibly stark. When researchers look at MRI cross-sections of aging muscle, it doesn't just shrink in size, it changes in its very composition. You develop what is called sarcopenic obesity.
So what does that look like under a scan?
Fat infiltrates the muscle cells themselves, intramuscular fat. The skeletal muscle stops looking like a lean, dark red piece of filet mignon, and it starts looking like a highly marbled ribeye steak.
Oh, wow. Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. If muscle is the primary dump site for blood sugar, like you said, the sponge that soaks it up, what happens to our metabolic health when that dump site shrinks and gets clogged with intramuscular fat?
It creates a metabolic traffic jam.
A traffic jam.
Yeah. When fat infiltrates the muscle, it impairs the insulin receptors on the surface of the muscle cells. The cellular locks literally get jammed. So when insulin knocks on the door trying to deliver glucose, the muscle cell can't open. The glucose stays trapped in the bloodstream. This is the literal definition of insulin resistance.
I want to bring in the suitcase analogy from the sources here because this makes the traffic jam crystal clear. Think of your skeletal muscle as a suitcase. Let's say you're packing for a weekend trip, but you try to shove a month's worth of clothes into a tiny carry-on.
Good luck with that.
Right, you overpack it, what happens? The clothes spill out everywhere, you can't even zip it up. If your muscle is the suitcase and you overpack it with food and calories without ever emptying it through movement and exercise, the glucose has nowhere to go. It spills out into your bloodstream.
And taking that analogy a step further, if our physical suitcases, our muscle mass, start actively shrinking in our 30s due to sarcopenia, how does that impact our daily diet?
That's the terrifying part. It means that the exact same amount of food you ate in your 20s, like the same bowl of pasta or the same sandwich, suddenly becomes metabolically toxic in your 40s or 50s.
Yep.
Not because the food changed. I mean, the pasta didn't get more toxic. It becomes toxic simply because you have less storage space in your body. The suitcase shrank, so the spillover happens much faster, even if your diet hasn't changed at all.
This spillover, this chronically elevated blood sugar, elevated insulin, elevated circulating triglycerides, is the quiet, persistent damage that drives cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's over the course of decades.
Wow.
The blood vessels get damaged, the brain becomes insulin resistant, which is exactly why Alzheimer's is now frequently referred to in research circles as type 3 diabetes.
Type 3 diabetes, that's heavy.
It is. This is why the physician argues so vehemently that these are not diseases of aging, they are diseases of sick, shrinking skeletal muscle.
So if our primary mission is to stop the suitcase from shrinking, we have to build and maintain muscle tissue. And you can't build a house without bricks, right?
Absolutely not.
So we have to supply the raw materials. This moves us directly into one of the most hotly debated, completely misunderstood topics in all of nutrition.
Protein, the essential building block of our metabolic currency.
We really need to deconstruct the protein myth here, because if you look at a standard nutrition label on the back of any food package, or if you ask a traditional dietitian, they will quote the recommended dietary allowance, the RDA. The current RDA for protein is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Right.
For an average-sized adult, when you actually measure that out on a plate, it looks like a surprisingly small amount of food.
It really does. To understand why the medical and dietary establishment recommends such a shockingly small amount, we have to trace the history of where that number actually came from. The physician reveals this highly utilitarian truth about the 0.8 grams per kilogram standard.
Yeah.
It is based on nitrogen balance studies that were originally designed for agriculture.
Wait, agriculture? We are basing human health guidelines on farming practices.
Yes, the underlying goal of those original nitrogen balance studies was essentially economic.
Yeah.
The agricultural industry was asking, what is the absolute cheapest way we can feed farm animals, pigs, cows, chickens, so that they continue to grow and don't die of a nutritional deficiency before they go to market?
That is insane.
They were looking for the minimum viable product.
Yeah.
They extrapolated some of that data, eventually adapted it through studies on 18-year-old men, and created a human baseline to prevent disease.
Let me just pause you there. What does nitrogen balance actually mean? Like, why are we measuring nitrogen?
So protein is unique among the macronutrients because it contains nitrogen. Carbohydrates and fats do not.
Okay.
So researchers can measure how much protein you are taking in by measuring the nitrogen in your food, and they can measure how much protein your body is breaking down and excreting by measuring the nitrogen in your urine and sweat. If the nitrogen going in equals the nitrogen going out, you are in nitrogen balance. You aren't losing lean tissue, but you aren't building any either. You are just maintaining the status quo.
So the RDA is basically the absolute bare minimum required to prevent you from being clinically deficient and actively wasting away.
Precisely.
It has absolutely nothing to do with what you need to thrive or what you need to combat aging, heal from an injury, or, build new muscle.
It's a survival metric, pure and simple. It's not an optimization metric. And astonishingly, it really hasn't been meaningfully updated to reflect modern longevity science since the 1980s.
The sources use an incredible analogy to highlight the absurdity of how we view this minimum requirement. Think about vitamin C.
Oh, this is a great comparison.
Right. The recommended dietary allowance for vitamin C is about 60 milligrams. That is the minimum amount required to prevent scurvy, your teeth falling out and your gums bleeding.
Yeah, pirate stuff.
Exactly. Now, if you feel a cold coming on, do you look at the bottle of vitamin C and say, uh-oh, I better stop at 60 milligrams. I don't want to overdo it?
Of course not.
No. People will happily take a massive dose, maybe 1,000 milligrams, to support their immune system. No one treats the minimum to prevent scurvy as a maximum limit.
But for some reason, society and even many medical professionals do exactly that with protein. People view that 0.8 grams per kilogram as a dangerous ceiling rather than the absolute floor.
Let's do the math on this so you can visualize what this looks like on your own dinner plate. If you have a person who weighs 115 pounds, the RDA suggests they need about 45 grams of protein a day.
To put that in perspective, 45 grams is roughly a single medium-sized chicken breast and maybe 2 scrambled eggs for the entire day.
So if that 115-pound person wants to actually combat age-related muscle loss and thrive, what is the new recommendation based on this muscle-centric research?
The new recommendation shifts the target significantly upward. The physician recommends roughly 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight.
Okay, I want to highlight the word ideal there because that's an important caveat.
It is crucial. You do not feed adipose tissue or fat protein. You feed lean mass. So if someone weighs 250 pounds, but their ideal healthy weight for their height and frame is 150 pounds, they aim for 150 grams of protein, not 250 grams.
Makes sense.
So for our 115-pound person whose ideal weight is 115 pounds, instead of 45 grams, they should be aiming for closer to 115 grams of protein. That is more than double the current RDA.
I can hear the skepticism right now from our listeners. People are thinking, isn't a high-protein diet bad for your kidneys? I read an article that said too much protein damages your organs.
Yeah, that comes up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The sources address this myth very clearly. First, doubling a ridiculously low minimum doesn't automatically make it a high amount. It just makes it an optimal amount.
Right.
Second, the idea that protein damages kidneys comes from patients who already had pre-existing advanced kidney disease. For those people, processing protein is a burden. But for a healthy individual, eating optimal protein does increase the glomerular filtration rate, meaning your kidneys work a bit harder. But they are designed to do that.
They're built for it.
Exactly. It's like saying running is bad for a healthy heart because it makes it beat faster.
So if you are healthy and you are using those amino acids, like if your muscles are demanding them through activity, your body knows exactly what to do with them.
Because we don't actually eat for protein in the abstract sense. When we consume a steak or a piece of fish, our digestive system breaks that protein down into amino acids. We eat to acquire amino acids.
Which brings up the next critical piece of the puzzle, because according to the deep dive, just knowing the total number of grams, say hitting your 115 grams, that isn't enough.
No, it's not.
The way we eat it, the timing and the dosage is critical. And this has to do with a biological phenomenon called anabolic resistance. What exactly is happening in our muscles as we get older that causes this resistance?
Well, as we age, our skeletal muscle becomes stubborn. It loses its metabolic efficiency. At a cellular level, older muscle experiences a decrease in capillary blood flow, meaning fewer nutrients can even reach the tissue in the first place.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, the molecular sensors within the muscle cell, specifically a pathway called mTOR, which acts as a trigger for muscle growth, they become blunted. The muscle is a nutrient-sensing organ, and as we get older, its sensors get dull. It requires a much louder signal to wake up and initiate the process of building new tissue, which scientists call muscle protein synthesis.
A quiet signal just gets ignored by aging muscle. The door's thick, and you have to knock harder to get someone to open it.
That's exactly it. This is why the common dietary advice of grazing on small amounts of protein throughout the day is highly ineffective for maintaining muscle as we age.
Let's explore that. For years, the massive fitness trend was to eat 6 small meals a day to keep your metabolism firing. But the sources highlight the concept of bolus dosing. How does a bolus dose bypass this anabolic resistance?
A bolus dose simply means consuming a large, concentrated amount of a nutrient in a single sitting. For protein, the clinical research indicates that to overcome anabolic resistance and flip the biological switch for muscle growth, you need to hit a specific threshold of amino acids in one meal.
And what's the threshold?
That threshold is typically 30 to 50 grams of high-quality protein.
So if I follow the old advice and eat 10 grams of protein 7 times a day, I might hit 70 grams total. But because 10 grams is a quiet signal, I never actually flipped the switch. I never triggered muscle protein synthesis once. But if I eat 35 grams of protein twice a day, even though it's the exact same 70 grams total, I've knocked loud enough to force the muscle to grow.
Yes. The clinical studies comparing these two methods, grazing versus bolus dosing, show that the bolus dosing results in significantly higher 24-hour muscle protein synthesis. You have to treat protein almost like a pharmaceutical intervention. You have to dose it.
And we have to address the quality of that dose, too. This can be a very sensitive topic, touching on veganism and vegetarianism. And as always, we are just looking at the physiological facts presented in the source material without taking sides in the diet wars or, getting into the ethics of food production.
Right, keeping it strictly to the biology.
The physician differentiates between high-quality and low-quality proteins based purely on biology.
High-quality proteins are animal-based beef, poultry, fish, eggs, dairy. Lower-quality proteins are plant-based beans, lentils, nuts. She makes it clear this is not a moral judgment. It is a biological calculation based on 2 specific factors.
What are they?
The percentage of the protein that your body can actually digest and absorb, and the amino acid profile itself.
Plant proteins are often bound in fibrous matrices that make them harder for human digestive enzymes to fully break down, right?
Yes, the bioavailability is lower. But more importantly, it comes down to the essential amino acids. There are 9 essential amino acids that our bodies cannot manufacture. We must get them from our diet. And skeletal muscle is particularly sensitive to one specific essential amino acid called leucine.
Leucine.
Plant proteins generally have a less optimal profile of these essential amino acids, and specifically lower amounts of leucine compared to a chicken breast or a piece of steak.
Okay, to play devil's advocate here, a few years ago, the fitness supplement industry was absolutely obsessed with BCAAs. Branch-chain amino acids.
Oh, I remember.
They sold these brightly colored powders that just isolated leucine, isoleucine, and valine. If leucine is the magic key that flips the mTOR switch and triggers muscle protein synthesis, why can't I just drink a scoop of BCAA powder and skip eating the heavy, protein-dense meals?
It's a very logical question, and it's why those supplements made billions of dollars. But the sources address this biological shortcut directly. The physician points out that while leucine might turn the switch on, you still need the full spectrum of all the other amino acids present to actually lay down the new tissue.
Yeah. Think of leucine as the foreman on a construction site. The foreman blows the whistle, yells at the crew, and tells everyone to get to work building the house.
Right.
But if the rest of the essential amino acids, the bricks, the mortar, the lumber, aren't physically on the site, it doesn't matter how loud the foreman yells, no building gets built.
That's the perfect way to visualize it. Nature doesn't package BCAAs alone. You won't find a fish, a cow, or a plant that only contains those 3 isolated amino acids. You need the full spectrum, the way it occurs in complex real food, to actually build the muscle.
So we've established the dietary foundation. We have the building blocks on the construction site. But you can eat 150 grams of perfect, high-quality protein a day. And if you just sit on the couch watching television, your body has no biological incentive to build muscle.
Not at all.
It's just going to convert those amino acids into expensive waste or glucose. The muscle must be forced to grow. The body needs a reason. This takes us to the demand side of the equation, exercise.
And the statistics the physician cites regarding exercise in the modern world are quite sobering. According to the sources, 50% of Americans do not exercise at all. Nothing.
Half.
Half. And only 24% meet the basic bare minimum CDC recommendations for both cardiovascular and strength training.
Half the country isn't exercising at all. And yet, this deep dive emphasizes that exercise must be viewed as an absolute non-negotiable for longevity, specifically resistance training. The minimum requirement she sets is 3 days a week of resistance training.
We have to shift our perspective on what the gym actually is. We aren't training to become better at exercising. We are training to become better at life. We are creating the biological demand that forces the protein to become metabolic currency.
There is a major psychological hurdle here, especially for women. I hear it all the time from friends and family. I don't want to lift heavy weights because I don't want to get bulky. I just want to tone.
The physician addresses that fear brilliantly, and she uses her own life as an example. She points out that she has a toddler who weighs 40 pounds.
Right.
As a mother, she is lifting that 40-pound toddler up off the floor, sitting her down, carrying her around on her hip all day long, and yet she isn't turning into a massive, bulky bodybuilder.
No mom has ever accidentally turned into Arnold Schwarzenegger just from picking up her kids. The biology just doesn't work that way for women, who generally have a fraction of the testosterone men do, without extreme targeted intervention and massive caloric surpluses.
Exactly.
Lifting heavy things is purely functional. It's what allows you to put your own suitcase in the overhead bin on an airplane when you're 70 without asking a stranger for help.
And the benefits of resistance training extend far beyond the muscle tissue itself. Let's look at a fascinating biomarker for longevity that the sources highlight: grip strength.
Grip strength,
Yeah.
literally just a measure of how hard you can squeeze a dynamometer. Why on earth is the strength of your hand connected to how long you live?
Because it serves as a powerful proxy for your overall functional capacity, your central nervous system output, and your total body's skeletal integrity. Grip strength correlates strongly with your ability to survive a health crisis. Consider the elderly. One of the greatest fears as we age is falling. But the mortality and biomechanical data reveals something deeply counterintuitive about hip fractures in older adults.
This detail from the sources completely shifted my understanding of aging. When an elderly person suffers a hip fracture, the assumption is always that they slipped on a rug, they fell, and the blunt force impact with the ground broke their hip.
The biomechanical data points out that in many cases, it's the exact opposite sequence of events.
Wait, really?
Yes, if we connect this to the bigger picture, their bones are so weak and their supporting muscle is so degraded that the hip bone simply snaps under the normal torque of walking or shifting weight to turn around.
Oh my God.
The bone breaks first and then they fall.
That is horrifying.
It highlights the double whammy effect of resistance training. When you lift weights, you're doing two critical things simultaneously. First, you are tearing the muscle fibers, signaling them to repair and grow thicker and stronger. But concurrently, when you put a mechanical load on your skeletal system, when you put a barbell on your back or hold heavy dumbbells, your bones respond to that stress.
Wolf's Law, right.
Yeah.
The bones adapt to the load under which they are placed.
Exactly. The mechanical stress triggers osteoblasts in the bone to lay down new tissue, increasing bone density. You are actively pushing off osteopenia and osteoporosis while simultaneously building the muscle armor required to catch yourself if you ever do trip.
I have a question about the timeline here. What does this mean for someone listening who is, say, 60 or 65 years old and has been completely sedentary their whole life? They've never touched a weight. Are they doomed? Is the goal at that age just to hold on and stop the bleeding? Or can they actually pack on new, lean muscle tissue?
The source material is definitive and really optimistic on this point. You can absolutely build new muscle at any age. While you do have anabolic resistance to overcome, the physiological mechanism for hypertrophy for muscle growth, it remains intact until the day you die. The evidence does not support the idea that you age out of the ability to get stronger.
So the best time to start was 20 years ago, but the second best time is today.
Exactly.
The machinery still works, it just needs a much stronger signal, which means heavier weights and bolus doses of protein.
And if you start this regimen eating 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight, bolus dosing, and resistance training 3 days a week, you need to know how to measure if it is actually working.
We love data, and we are firmly in the era of biomarkers and hyper-quantified health. The physician outlines a few ways to track your progress, starting with physical markers. You should know your physical numbers just as intimately as you know your weight on a scale.
Physical baseline metrics are the most honest assessment of your metabolic currency. How many strict push-ups can you do? How many air squats can you perform in a minute? How long can you hold a dead hang from a pull-up bar before your grip gives out?
That's a hard one.
It is. These are direct, functional measurements of your longevity in action.
But then we get into the blood markers. When you go to your doctor for your annual physical, they run a standard metabolic panel. What specific numbers should you be zeroing in on based on this muscle-centric philosophy?
The sources highlight a few key targets that often get overlooked in favor of standard cholesterol tests. First, fasting insulin. You want this number to be low, ideally around 5 micronets per milliliter,
Why insulin and not just fasting glucose? I feel like everyone looks at glucose.
because your body will do everything in its power to keep fasting glucose normal. It will pump out more and more insulin to shove that glucose into your cells. By the time your fasting glucose goes up, your metabolic system has already been failing for a decade, right? A low fasting insulin shows that your body is highly sensitive. It barely needs any insulin to manage your baseline blood sugar.
Meaning your muscle suitcases are doing their job efficiently. They are empty and ready to soak up the glucose.
Furthermore, you want to look at your triglycerides, which are fats in the blood. You want those under 100 milligrams per deciliter. And when it comes to cholesterol, the physician suggests looking beyond the standard LDL marker that everyone typically panics about.
The classic bad cholesterol.
The sources suggest that ApoB, apolipoprotein B, is a much more accurate and relevant marker for cardiovascular risk than simply looking at the total volume of LDL cholesterol.
Break that down for me. Why is ApoB a better metric?
Think of cholesterol as cargo and lipoproteins as the boats that carry the cargo through your bloodstream. Standard LDL measures the total amount of cargo, but cardiovascular disease is driven by the number of boats crashing into your artery walls and getting stuck.
Okay, I follow.
ApoB measures the actual number of boats.
Yeah.
You can have a normal amount of cargo, but a massive number of tiny, dangerous boats, especially if you are eating a diet rich in high-quality animal proteins and fats. Knowing your particle number, your ApoB, gives you a much clearer picture of your actual risk.
Okay, we cannot talk about biomarkers, weight loss, and the current medical landscape without addressing the massive elephant in the room. We are firmly in the GLP-1 era. Drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, they're absolutely everywhere. It's all anyone is talking about.
It is arguably the most significant shift in obesity medicine in decades, and the physician's take on these drugs is highly nuanced. She prioritizes biology over dogma.
I was actually surprised by her stance. She isn't inherently against them. She supports them if the tool matches the severity of the issue. If a patient has been battling 100 pounds of excess fat for 10 or 20 years, their joints are failing, and they are severely metabolically compromised, she views these peptides as a powerful, necessary tool.
However, there is a massive, widely publicized risk associated with these drugs.
Yep.
Catastrophic muscle loss.
Yeah, you see the headlines about Ozempic face or DEXA scans showing people losing huge amounts of lean mass alongside the fat. But let's look closer at the mechanism here, because whenever an entire industry violently bashes a specific protocol, it's usually assigned to challenge the herd mentality. Does the GLP-1 molecule itself attack and destroy muscle tissue?
The mechanism of muscle loss isn't a direct chemical attack by the drug. The drug shuts off your appetite signals in the brain and slows gastric emptying so intensely that you enter a massive caloric deficit.
You essentially stop eating.
If you are barely eating, and what little you do eat is low in protein because you just want a cracker or some toast and you aren't lifting weights, your body still needs energy to survive. If no food is coming in, it will break down its own muscle tissue for amino acids and convert them into glucose.
It's pure starvation physiology.
Exactly. The body consumes itself.
But the physician notes that in her clinical practice, when patients on these medications are strictly monitored and forced to eat a high-protein diet, hitting that 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight, and they maintain a strict resistance training protocol, the outcome is entirely different.
Completely different.
They lose primarily adipose tissue, the fat, and they preserve their skeletal muscle mass.
It proves that the problem isn't the peptide itself. The problem is the lack of a muscle-centric strategy while using the peptide. If you protect the metabolic currency with protein and exercise, the drug works as a tool to shed the fat without stripping the engine.
But implementing that requires an immense amount of discipline. Think about it. When you have zero appetite and the thought of food makes you slightly nauseous, forcing down a 40-gram bolus of chicken breast or a protein shake requires serious conscious effort.
And that reality perfectly bridges us to the final and perhaps most vital aspect of this entire protocol. Because knowing all the biology, understanding the leucine threshold, and memorizing your ApoB numbers is completely useless if you don't have the mental framework to execute these behaviors every single day for the rest of your life.
This is where the rubber meets the road. Because aging, as the physician provocatively defines it in the sources, is the aggressive pursuit of comfort.
That definition is incredibly astute. Culturally and biologically, we engineer discomfort out of our lives as we get older. We seek the softer chair, the closer parking spot, the warmer room, the easier, lower impact workout.
We think we've earned the right to be comfortable, but in doing so, we engineer away the very environmental stimuli, the physical stress our bodies need to remain vital.
Use it or lose it.
The body operates on a use it or lose it principle. Cultivating longevity requires understanding that motivation is fleeting and completely unreliable. Discipline must supersede motivation.
The sources detail her personal approach to this. She talks about morning routines and the importance of keeping small promises to yourself. For the physician, that means waking up at 4 a.m. to train in her garage gym before her young kids wake up.
At 4 a.m.
Yes. It's not because she necessarily feels highly motivated or energized at 4 a.m. in the dead of winter. It's because she made a promise to herself, and she understands that breaking that promise degrades her self-integrity.
To truly illustrate this mindset, the physician shares a profound story from her medical practice. She treats many elite warfighters and special operations personnel, and she tells the story of a Navy SEAL breacher.
A breacher is the operator whose job it is to carry the explosives, blow up the doors, and clear the way for the team during combat operations.
This is a man who survived some of the most dangerous, high-stress environments on Earth for 2 decades. He did 20 years in combat zones and came out unscathed. But he came home, retired, and while riding his motorcycle at 5 miles an hour through an intersection, a teenager who was texting and driving ran a light and hit him.
Just a senseless accident.
It was a senseless, slow-speed accident, but the trauma was severe enough that he lost his leg.
6 months after the amputation, he is sitting in the physician's office for a checkup. She's leaning in, expecting to have to unpack a massive amount of psychological trauma, anger, bitterness, and loss of identity.
Yeah.
She gently asks him how he's doing, how he's coping with the loss, and he looks at her, genuinely confused by her tone, and says, "Oh, you mean my leg? That was 6 months ago, Doc?"
He had zero narrative, zero self-pity. The event happened, and he had already moved past the emotional weight of it.
This raises a critical psychological concept found in centenarians and elite performers alike. The concept of neutrality.
Neutrality. They don't attach a devastating, catastrophic internal narrative to their setbacks. They don't spiral into, why me?
If they miss a workout, they don't beat themselves up, declare the whole week a failure, and go eat a box of donuts. If they face a health challenge, even something as catastrophic as an amputation, they process the objective reality of the situation without wrapping it in a destructive emotional story. The event simply is.
Think of it like viewing your health as a bank account. When you pay your electric bill, you don't fall to your knees in the kitchen weeping about the injustice of having less money in your checking account.
And you don't.
You don't take it personally. You just acknowledge the new balance, and you know you need to make a deposit on your next payday. It's a neutral transaction. Elite performers treat their bodies and their habits the exact same way. Missed a meal. Neutral. Eat the protein next time. Injured a limb. Neutral. Adapt the workout to train the other limbs.
It is the ultimate form of resilience, and it is a skill that takes relentless practice. It is not an innate talent for most people. It is a forged mindset.
Let's pull all of this together and recap the true mission we accomplished today. We set out to change how you think about aging, and hopefully we've shifted the goalpost.
I think we have.
The goal of health is no longer merely losing weight or obsessing over making yourself smaller on the scale. The goal is aggressively building and protecting your metabolic currency, your skeletal muscle.
We've learned that the standard dietary advice is merely a baseline for preventing death, not a blueprint for thriving. We need roughly 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. We need to utilize bolus dosing, 30 to 50 grams of high-quality protein in a single sitting to overcome the anabolic resistance of aging.
Yeah.
And we must recognize that resistance training, lifting heavy things, is a biological non-negotiable for pushing back against sarcopenia, insulin resistance, and cognitive decline.
At the top of the show, we talked about looking in the mirror and obsessing over the visible signs of aging the paint job on the car while completely ignoring the rusting engine underneath. You now have the biological manual to rebuild that engine.
You do.
But I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own today. Our deep dive ended with this profound concept of neutrality, the mental resilience of elite performers to face adversity without a destructive narrative. We know that resistance training requires intentionally putting yourself under physical stress. It requires enduring the burning sensation in your muscles, the heavy breathing, the urge to just drop the weight and quit.
The discomfort.
Yeah. So could it be that forcing yourself to endure the physical discomfort of lifting weights isn't just about building the muscle tissue? Could it be that the gym is actually the daily laboratory, the practice ground required to build that exact mental neutrality?
Wow.
Every time you pick up a weight when you don't want to, you are practicing discipline over emotion. You can't hack hard work. There are no biological shortcuts. So maybe the muscle is just a happy byproduct, and the hard work itself is the medicine.
A very powerful thought to carry with you into your next workout.
Keep building that currency. We'll see you on the next deep dive.